grew up in a home where we had an African-American woman. Her name was Zenora Carter. Nora, as we called her, had actually come to work for my grandmother when she was about 17 or 16. And when my mother got married, Nora came along as part of her household and became the primary caretaker of the three Salzmann children, and lived up in North Philadelphia and was very active in a church and had a life of her own within her church. Nora never had a family of her own, and we were really her family and almost like her children, and we felt that she was like our second mother, because in a sense she was the woman who really raised us. She was actually an incredibly good cook, learned how to prepare all the traditional Jewish foods. For example, she prepared all the gefilte fish and matzo ball soup and all the other dishes that were common. I remember quite distinctly sitting at the dining room table, and I didn't like certain vegetables, and she would say, "Larry, eat your peas," and if I didn't eat the peas, bam, she smacked me. You know, Nora kind of ruled with an iron hand. She was a real strict disciplinarian. As I got older, it used to be upsetting to me when my mother would refer to Nora as my girl. And I found that, very condescending. And I would say to my mother, "Look, Nora is actually older than you. How can you be calling her a girl when the woman's 55? But my mother would say, "Well, I didn't really mean any harm in that. That's just how I always, thought of her." And Nora died prior to my mother's death. Mm-hmm. And I really loved her a great deal, as did both my brother and sister.
My mother, God rest her soul, bless her soul, worked for a prominent Pittsburgh Jewish family for 20 years. And there were, I think, 5 or 6 children in this family. And I just recall her going to work all the time and helping, raise the children. Besides doing the physical housework, she was also like a nanny. And, used to talk about that when we grew up, that when she had raised all of us, that she would go and live with this family. And we all, of course, protested and told her that's not what we wanted her to do. She always referred to their residence as out to the house. My brother-in-law brought up whether or not this particular employee was paying Social Security for her. Probably after she had put in at least 15 years, because, my mom was getting on in age, and it was found that they were not paying Social Security for her, and after all those years, and they had to be legally made to do so. We were very, very poor. Most of my childhood was spent wearing the secondhand clothes that came home from this family, as well as shoes. My mother would bring home gefilte fish and matzo balls, and we would hear talk of certain holidays, but we would actually literally eat certain Jewish foods in our house. Well, in another sense also, it was understood that, a talk among the domestics, that this was one way that as a group of people, that rather than give you physical dollars, they gave you the food and the used clothing. On one level, it could be understood as an act of philanthropy. On another, a kind of a very clever manipulation.
It took a long time for my mother to accept. After a long time of hiding the relationship with Rufus, which made me feel real uncomfortable. And finally, after a number of months, I came to her and I said, I guess I was almost 40, and I said, do you want me to be alone the rest of my life? And that was the question that just absolutely turned her around, and that was the epiphany I was referring to. She just suddenly realized what he meant to me, and absolutely did a complete 360-degree turn. It was a total acceptance from that moment on of the situation of Rufus, and she loves him as if he were born to her. I find much more tolerance in the black community. It angers me because I see an enormous intolerance in Jewish people that I think, especially among Jewish people, should not be there. It's an attitude there that black people are less than Jewish people. They're not as smart. I just think that a lot of people believe that.
Generally, my family's perspective has always been, how is the other person treating one of ours? And they saw immediately the kind of relationship that Carol and I had, and accepted the relationship. And the backdrop of that is, and that's where both our families come together, is that independent of our relationship, both families are very tolerant, just simply tolerant people. And what I've concluded is that someone who is intolerant of me is generally an intolerant person. That is, I don't think that the bad person is only a bad person in one small area.
I saw, for the first time, racism carried to the ultimate. I saw what people could do when they say you're not good enough, you're not worthy because you're Jewish, or you're Polish, or you're handicapped, or you're a gypsy. And I knew that had I been in Germany at the time, I too would have been put in that concentration camp, because I was told that I wasn't good enough and I wasn't worthy back in my own country. So now I knew that it was racism, anti-Semitism, all those evils that brought this about. And I said, somehow that has to go. You can't, by your silence, give tacit agreement to those who would dare to denigrate or hurt somebody else because of their religion or their race. Maybe some incidents or events will happen to us, and we will tend to blame everybody for the acts of maybe one or two. And we have to somehow be able to rise above that. It happens with whites, it happens with blacks, it happens with gays, it happens with straights. All kinds of people are good and bad.
Growing up in South Africa, I remember as a 10-year-old the lesson that somehow Jews had been victims in the Holocaust, and the pain, and it really had touched me deeply, that reality, and especially the Yellow Star. And here were these, as I walked home, I saw the scene where blacks were sort of very gruffly, somewhat violently asked for something, and then they wouldn't have it, and they'd get thrown in the back of a police truck. There was no respect whatsoever. It was the people were being treated with as if they were animals in some way. And then I pieced this together, that they were being arrested on pass laws for not having the passbook, and here Jews, I just learned how to have yellow stars, and yet our stories were so much the same, and yet our reality was so different. It was as if I was now on the other side, you know. And that's what I often think about the Holocaust, is that for us as Jews, one of the most painful questions is, why didn't people act to change this? People who were bystanders. And the question for me has always felt like the question's about us. Now, today, the question I struggle with in my life is about us, how we act, and how can we act in our world, because the stark reality is that Jews are one of the richest ethnic groups in the richest country in the world, and that African Americans are the poor in that country, right? So the devastating statistic is that in Philadelphia, I believe, a third of the children grow up in homes that are below the poverty datum line, and for African Americans, that's 40% of their kids. And I think it's a profound switch for Jews to think of ourselves as privileged. It goes to the deepest parts of Jewish consciousness because, as I explained then, our myth is of coming out as slaves from Egypt. And it's very challenging for us as Jews to deal with the material prosperity that we've come into in America because we don't think of ourselves that way. We think of ourselves as victims. That's what our culture is based on, is us being the underdog, being the victim. And we're not the victim. There's no great privilege in being the victim of the world, That's wonderful. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to celebrate our blessings and to share them.
As a youngster, my father was told by his dad, my grandfather, that the family was Jewish. Being Jewish is a positive, and we've always looked at that. When individuals see us, especially Ashkenazi Jews, they would say, you have two strikes, you're black and you're Jewish, and I realized that there are other ethnic or different bloods. I don't believe that there is any person in the world today who could say that their blood is, still pure. Society places certain labels on the individuals. For example, some people would call me a black, relating my identity simply to the color of skin. We as human beings, from the time of Adam, had to label or name something in order to know it. And in fact, my identity is a Jewish identity, foremost, primary and foremost. Secondary, I have to deal and realistically deal with the social prejudices that would affect person of color here in the United States and the at-large worldwide community.
What I felt as a child is that there was a marked contrast between going to visit my father's family and my mother's family. When we went to visit my father's family, it was a huge embrace, and we were lovingly welcomed. And we went to visit my mother's family, we were tolerated or acknowledged. There was never any question, but it was as if we were coming from another planet. Jews have the option of being white, and it is a privilege that Jews in America enjoy, but which Jews are reluctant to acknowledge. They are much more comfortable thinking about themselves as similarly oppressed people without acknowledging or recognizing that very critical asymmetry in the American experience. In my mother's case, what surprised her most was that her father, who was the son of a rabbi and prided himself on being an intellectual, was the most opposed to her marriage. She said to us that we had the capacity to bridge both categories because we had the experience of seeing both worlds, and that she hoped we would be able to use that experience in a positive way.
We came to adopt Harry, our son who's black, when he was 4 days old, because we wanted a second child, and we didn't care what color the child was, just as long as the child was healthy. That was our only prerequisite. We have Ethel. She's very loving, very giving, and Harry gets to spend a lot of time with her and gets to go to her house and is part of her family as well. And I think that that's really good for him because there'll be experiences that are really valuable to him. He's going to have to be very prepared for what the world is going to present him with. And I really thought that I would know what it would feel like to be black. Well, I was dead wrong, and it's virtually impossible for someone who is white to feel the full thrust of what prejudice is unless something unusual happens to you to allow you to have those feelings. And in our case, Harry has happened to us. And when people see Harry and I together, 9 times out of 10 they assume my husband is black. And the looks that I get they could kill. And it's so peculiar to be judged that way with such force. They say that strides have been made. I mean, the strides that have been made compared to what has to be made are just a drop in the bucket.
I'll be very honest with you. I marched in Washington in '63. I heard the speech from Martin Luther King, okay? He was truly a world leader. He was a Gandhi. Whether he had human faults, that doesn't mean at all that he wasn't absolutely a genius to be listened to. Since that time, all of this nonsense that's taken place is because the world doesn't operate on black and white. It doesn't operate on whether you're Hispanic or whether you're from Serbia or wherever those people, whatever. The world operates on a class level. But I'm finding a small group of people, and they have found me, who come from the same background, even though it's totally dissimilar. But mom and dad were the same, or whatever. They were brought up the same way with the same values. They understand about hard work. They understand that we have to work on Saturday and Sunday and holidays because that's the nature of the business. We're all exactly the same. They happen to be black. I'm not. What's in your heart is in your heart. What you profess on the outside is chosen. What you're made up of, that's the reality of the human being. We've never been kosher. If they want to be kosher, that's their thing. I hope their hearts are as pure as their stomachs are. And they're so busy being so pure and kosher, let them be that good in business. Let them represent the Jewish community well in business. Let them understand, as I do, that every deal I'm involved in, every transaction, I not only have the responsibility of my own reputation, my business's reputation, but the Jewish community's reputation. I managed to do that quite well without being kosher.
We were very fortunate. We were very, very fortunate. The riots did not hit this particular block of Ridge Avenue. Am I right, E. Mark?
It hit this block. Yes, it did hit this block, but because of your father, nobody touched the store.
My father was loved here. The customers still come in, and they all ask for him. This is the only business our family really ever knew. We've been here a long time. There were good times and there were bad times. My father worked very hard as a child. I didn't know I had a father because he was here putting in 60, 70 hours a week. It was a 7-day-a-week operation.
We're open 7 days a week?
We're open Sunday until 1:30 now. In the winter season, it's hogmaws and chitlins are our biggest specialty. And all the smoked Virginia meats, which are very, very big. We're known for the Virginia country hams, right? In the summertime, I would say primarily it's ribs.
Do you ever get any Jewish customers?
No, we don't. The food stamp program has been cut tremendously. And I swear, believe it or not, my customers are so poor that at the end of the month, it breaks my heart that they come in and they buy neck bones to make soup, and they buy beans, and they're making big pots of some kind of stew or something because there's no money to eat. And I swear, believe it or not, it hurts me. I sometimes come home depressed that they are that poor.
I wouldn't say that Jews and blacks don't get along. 95% of my friends are Jewish. And so a man's only good as his word. Being black have a lot to do with business. If I was white, I would be much further in life in the business. Some doors were shut in my face. You still have some bigots, but God had blessed me, and they brought me from a long way. And I started working for Shoepex in '49. And from there, I went to driving salesman From a driving salesman, I started this business. And I started this in 1983. He taught me some things about pickles here. They're basically garlic, salt water, vinegar. Everything is fresh fermentation. It's strictly Jewish pickle. Most of the Jewish people, they like them half green, and most black people like them well done. They're sourer than the green pickle. The green pickle have most of a cucumber taste. A long time ago, you couldn't get green pickles year-round, so everybody used to put up pickles in storage, and that's the only thing you really could do. But now you get green pickles 52 weeks of the year. So far, I'm pretty happy. At least I keep bread on the table.
Oh, when I was a teenager, I don't know how many jobs I got turned down for because I was simply overqualified and black. Blacks can't be racist because we're not in power. To be racist, you must be in the power of the ruling class and must have the power to execute discriminatory acts towards others based on their race, creed, or color. We're not the ruling class, so we can never be racist. Most blacks who go to Ivy League schools don't know who the hell they are. They're first and second generation sons and daughters of the black bourgeoisie. Those people who have purposely moved out of the black community after the 1960s or during the 1960s and given up on their own race. Half these people don't have a sense of their own identity, think they're more white than black. There's going to be a degree of separation and integration on both sides. More or less, it's up to blacks to be more wary of things that are going down, and to support organizations that are positive to them. If a black comes off and says something about what Jews do, he is called anti-Semitic. And how can blacks be anti-Semitic when we're the true Semites? But yet when the Jewish Defense League goes off and do something, they're not claimed anti-black or anti-white.
One of the things that we have to be concerned about is the question of whether or not the relationship between blacks or African American and Jews is either beside the point or passé. And there's been a lot of controversy over how much we really had and whether it was either exaggerated or blown out of proportion or sort of a tenuous or a surface relationship instead of a real deep, meaningful relationship. And I think it was probably a combination of all of the above plus more. I think there was a feeling of sort of a brotherhood or kinship because each was an oppressed group. And one could argue all you wanted about, well, who was more oppressed, the Jews or the blacks from Africa? And, you don't get anywhere talking about those kinds of issues, but I thought there was a real hopeful sign of brotherhood in the 60s. I was very much involved in the civil rights movement and wanted and still want equality for everybody. I think many, or at least some Jews say, look, we worked really hard, we tried to forge a partnership, and what do we get? Vilification. And I think they're less willing to suffer additional hurt. So they say, well, look, all right, I tried, I did my best, and that's it.
Well, blacks and Jews have the same problem that anybody else has. There's no love given. There's many great religions, but nobody's showing love. You got Muslims killing Muslims, you got Christians killing Christians, you got Jews killing Jews. It's all over the world like that. Why? Because one dislikes another for some trivial reason. It has nothing to do with anything strong, but the most weakest part of anything they find to exploit. We're all creatures of the same creator. We all breathe one air. We all drink one water. We all use one earth, one land. Therefore, we have a common bond. The only differences we have is in the shades of color. And these shades of color, they don't come from any human being has no control over what color they are. It comes from what climate and what area of the earth you live in. That's not saying that you don't have the same brain I have. That's not saying that you don't have the same heart I have. It's not saying any of that. We all have the same human potential.
Izzy is the closest Jewish friend that I have. And that's because we go back like 23 years.
We don't even, we've gotten so close that the Jewishness and the blackness has never, we don't even think about it, which is the way it should be. If it were not for these so-called leaders who are out for themselves. If you don't know someone, you can believe anything that someone else would want to propagandize.
But there's bad and good in every race of people. And if you don't do anything to me, I shouldn't hold what your race or someone that was black did to me. But a lot of people will stigmatize you because you're black. And just being black automatically makes you like everybody else. And that's wrong. It's like, give me a chance, because I am who I am. You know, I might be the best person in the world and never did anything to anybody. Why would you prejudge me to be a bad person?
If you get to know people, you forget about all the stereotypes.
If we're ever to get together, we have to look beyond the race. He don't bleed any different than I do.